Hello, team. I wanted to speak to you about the US election again, but hopefully a shorter video than I did last night. And I want to talk to you about polls. So this is a US election special. We're going to talk about polls, but also early voter trends and what they can tell us about particularly Pennsylvania and what might happen in Pennsylvania, and also whether we can extrapolate that conclusion across the electorate as a whole. Pennsylvania being the really vital state to win. People are saying that whoever wins Pennsylvania wins the election. Okay, so we're going to start with polls though. And it seems very evident that polls can change people's opinions about how things are going just by looking at those polls and people shouting about those polls, and you go, oh my goodness, oh this is terrible, or oh this is amazing, without realizing that polls can be very badly done. They can skew, and we need to be very careful with which polls we look at and pay attention to. So just putting in polls into Twitter as a search, we'll go down and look for, okay, you got Polymarket. It's interesting. That's a betting one owned by Nate Silver. And Nate Silver is... some people are criticizing him at the moment for being more interested in making money rather than being accurate in polling aggregation and conclusions, so on and so forth. And in fact, we'll get on to that a little bit later, but talk about Nate Silver and 538, etc. But we'll come down. New poll by Marquette. Now, I like it when people put the rating of the pollster afterwards. A+ rated pollster, rated by whom I would wonder, but Marquette is a decent pollster and has Harris up 52-48 in a Wisconsin poll. So that's really good. It's a battleground state, Wisconsin. She wins that. She's in a good position maybe to get other polls. But here's interesting. Okay, the first proper poll with looks at it, with a look at the poll here. Just in, Trump opens up a all caps 7-point lead in the latest Rasmussen daily national poll. Now that's actually from October the 4th, so 3 days ago. So Trump has a 7-point lead, and you look at that, oh my God, that is absolutely incredible. But what you need to do is understand that not all pollsters are interested in accuracy, and actually Scott Rasmussen is a great example. If we go to 538's pollster ratings, and by the way, Rasmussen have just been involved in controversy and have been kicked off, I think, 538's average, their polling average that they calculate. But if we put in here is their ranked pollsters. Marquette, the A-rated pollster, gets a 3 out of 3 there, and has a poll score negative -1.1, not quite sure what that suggests, a transparency score of 10, so they're really transparent, and they've looked at a bunch of their polls to have got that. Okay, so that's to give you an example, an understanding of what this ranking is. Okay, now let's do a Control F for Rasmussen, and we'll see where they end up. So not even on the ranking, right down at the bottom, Scott Rasmussen reports negative 0.3 on the poll score, transparent score 3.3, so 3 out of 10 transparency on a lot of polls they've looked at. So really poor rating, doesn't even get a star rating at all. It is not properly ranked here. So that's something to take into account. So it's very easy to look at the socials and look at Rasmussen here and go, oh my goodness, it's terrible for, in this case, Kamala Harris. She's down by 7 points. And Rasmussen is, along with Trafalgar and a few other right-wing pollsters, are very much playing to a certain audience, and they will arguably give polls that skew to the right so that they get a lot of coverage on places like Fox News. Fox News will shout about this. Certain right-wingers like this person, Eric Doherty, will shout about this, and they'll get eventually, get people buying into what they have to offer. Now, we're going to have a little look at this before we go on to look at the early votes and what they can tell us with a chap called, I think Josh, his name is, on Ettingermentum, that he has a Substack and a Twitter handle. He's a poll analyst, and he's on the majority report here. Sorry, I want to actually interview this guy because I think he'd be fascinating. This is what he has to say about pollsters.
All right, let's turn to your guide to pollsters, because I think this is very helpful for people. You have been quick to point out this dynamic here that I'll read this part of the beginning of your piece. While past elections usually only saw one or two well-known firms with systemic Republican slants, the Biden era has seen a rise of a huge number of such pollsters who often put out just as much, if not more, data than nonpartisan firms. Can you talk about this new dynamic in polling and these Republican slanted firms kind of cropping up and being included in things like Nate Silver's average, for example?
Yeah, I think this is an instance where the kind of institutional sort of people who follow this, who have been doing this like since like the 2000s or even earlier than that, are not really kind of adjusting as much to new reality. The presumption, like the kind of game theory sort of logic for why Nate Silver would always include everybody and everybody into his models was that like every firm has their primary incentive is to be as correct as possible so they can make more money and get more clients. So we shouldn't assume anything about their motivations other than that they want to like have the most accurate numbers possible. Like
this is so important. So the prevailing attitude towards pollsters has been that pollsters are only really interested in being accurate, and the more accurate they are, the more money they're going to get. Like the incentive for getting contracts for doing polls is accuracy. I talked with Dave Trotter recently from Voting Trend. Go and check out that live stream we did together. Really interesting, where we talked about this, about, what are the motivations for polling? And actually, it's not the case that pollsters are so interested in being accurate anymore. That's like out the window.
Like that was just like the rule that he had. Anything other than that would just be unfair discrimination. And I think like in 2012, that was probably a fair thing to say. I don't think that's what things look like now in an era of widespread election denial and extreme polarization, where like it's a lot less. There's a lot less of an incentive to like try to be the number one rated pollster in the New York Times like polling metric rating system or whatever like they have, or like 538's rating system. That's a lot less of like that's a lot less lucrative than to just have the best numbers for Trump as much as possible, so you can be put on Fox News to talk about why Trump is winning.
Now, something to say about this. If we look at the pollster ratings let's look at the top 15, right, from 538. New York Times, Siena College, ABC Washington Post, Marquette University Law School, YouGov, Monmouth University Polling Institute, Marist College, Suffolk University, Data Orbital, University of Massachusetts Lowell Center, Emerson College, Muhlenberg College Institute for Public Opinion, Seltzer & Co., University of North Florida Public Opinion, CNN, Survey USA. Okay, what you should notice from all of these top ones is that the vast majority of the best pollsters in the US are educational institutions. Why are they the best pollsters? Because they're not interested in making a profit. These are educational institutions doing this for, I guess, props and reputation, but also to do proper work on this. They are involved in analysing for their political faculties to be able to do good research, etc., etc. Academic institutions have the most reputable polls in general, along with, and you might not like this, but mainstream media. So if people like ABC, and actually you can add Fox News has got a pretty good reputation as well. Fox News do it together with someone else. It's not like Fox News do their polls to give you the conclusions of like that their anchors would want, being Fox News anchors. But actually they're not even in top 15, even top 20. But nonetheless, you get the point. So you got mainstream media organizations do a pretty good job. And the third one that I've noticed here are things like YouGov, Survey USA, Ipsos. So these are survey companies whose job is to do like big survey companies, not just little 2-bit organizations that are just going to sell their wares to whoever. These are Ipsos, YouGov, Survey USA. They are big organizations that have a really big reputation and do massive contracts with people. So all of these have a much greater interest in doing things properly and having accurate data. Quinnipiac University, CNN in the top 20. Seltzer & Co is interesting. This is a small. What do they operate only in one state, and I forget what the state is. It's somewhere like Iowa or Ohio, somewhere like that, and they just do that, and Seltzer & Company, and they're just really good in that one area, but it's very niche, and that's why they rate up that highly. Just other than that, we've basically got colleges, mainstream media outlets, and big data survey organizations.
This was already dynamic for like years. I think like in the late 2000s during the Tea Party, they would have Scott Rasmussen, who would repeatedly go on Fox to say how his polls vindicated like Republican Party talking points. And this has become a whole industry in the era of Trump, where you have these entire pollsters whose whole purpose is to fashion results that show results, and often like shifts that just fit entirely in line with Republican talking points. People become huge celebrities off of doing this. They like get constant like appearances on like TV and on radio off of having these results that go a certain way. So we're at a point for half of the political world, the incentive is not to have the most accurate results, it's to have the most like pro-Trump results. And in 2022, we saw this happening constantly, where it wouldn't just be the very well-known, the people who were well-known for giving pro-Republican results, like gave very extreme numbers for them. There were like, I think Trafalgar had one race in Vermont they said was within single digits, and they were off by 30 points on that. But there were also like a lot of smaller firms that were popping up with similar numbers that were also trying to get like a lot of attention. Not only were these like professional outlets, a lot of these were just run by like there was one firm that was just run by two high school teenagers.
Can you sorry to cut you off, Josh, but like this is, you have a group in, you categorize these in your piece. Again, people should be subscribing to your Substack. This is this section called "The Firms Run by Teenagers and or Right-Wing Twitter Accounts." Talk about this new dynamic, as you were about to get into, but
we'll just talk about that. Let him talk about that, because I think it's really important. Sorry, I was trying to find, as he was speaking, the scandal involving Rasmussen just recently, last couple of weeks. Major conservative polls cited by media secretly worked with Trump team. Leaked emails reveal truth about Rasmussen reports and the way the Trump campaign is breaking election law. So they are involved in the scandal, and these guys aren't interested in providing accurate polls, one would argue, and that's what Josh argues there. These guys are interested in giving certain outlets what they want to hear. But anyway, he's going to talk about how 538, as the 538 is now not owned by Nate Silver. So Nate Silver started 538. It is now part of ABC News. But their polling average has long been seen as really important, and you get a sense of what's really going on nationwide. But here, Josh and other people have been doing this as well, have been criticizing how they include polls that really shouldn't be in the polling average. These are just absolute like wingnut polls. And he's talking about one that's run by Patriot Polling, run by two teenagers here.
But these other right-wing pollsters that are run by literal teenagers.
Yeah, so the first one of this was like a very kind of memorable moment. If you ever follow elections on Twitter, it was the Pennsylvania race with Oz and Fetterman, and there was like Fetterman started off with these really, really big double-digit leads, and then it started kind of falling a little bit as like he wasn't able to campaign, and his polarization kind of kicked in at the end. And people like thought that his odds were plummeting, and there was always a question like, who will be the first pollster to show Dr. Oz ahead? And then like in early October, there was a pollster that showed Dr. Oz ahead. It was called Patriot Polling. It was run by two like actual teenagers in a high school, like I don't know, like a high school somewhere. And it said Dr. Oz was leading. Everybody thought this was like the biggest joke like they've ever seen. But then like the same day, Nate Silver included Patriot Polling in his model. Like this firm with no track record, run by like self-admittedly run by high schoolers. He puts their data in there like at the same like right next to like every other pollster who's like that's run by actual professionals. That's sort of an extreme example, like where it's just obviously kind of like a joke. I thought like there was no explanation for that, that he was deliberately trying to like shift the margins in favor of Republicans. But he included them. He included several firms like that are run by adults, but like are controlled by like election deniers, like that just like
SoCal,
to
Qantas News.
Yeah.
Those are the ones that you list there, right?
Yeah, those are new ones. Those are not run by they could be run by adults. They are run by they have started this year, and they are run by right-wing Twitter accounts. SoCal is actually, I thought, was a bit of like kind of a gallant to the goofuses of this sort of thing, because he does try to make himself look legitimate, even though he is like a right-wing like Twitter account guy who's like fake DMs to like in feuds with like liberal Twitter people. But he and then Qantas he does the same thing as him. They basically just they do like the cheapest possible surveys on these like AI like polling survey like software companies, and they don't actually have much control over their own results besides weighting, which can be pretty significant. But
so on and so forth. I mean, you get the point that here we've got in these major polling averages. Polls that really should be, I guess, dismissed is the idea. Qantas polls there, paid for by Republican funded, so that it's admitted down at the bottom. That's what that red diamond means. And then the other one was SoCal, SoCal Strategies. Again, SoCal Research, partly when it's done with Red Eagle. That is funded by Republicans, but otherwise not. But these are not pollsters with any kind of easily decipherable provenance. So we don't know who they are. There's no transparency. We don't know where they get their funding from, etc., etc. To the point where Dave Trotter, who as I mentioned, chatted with previously, said is so-called legitimate, did a whole live stream on who the hell are these guys. I've tried to find out, etc., etc. And also on Atlas Intel, there's another pollster, a Brazilian pollster. But these people aren't necessarily really good pollsters, and yet they get thrown into the averages, and also they just get talked about on the Tinternet all the time, and you're left thinking, oh my goodness, it's way worse or way better or whatever than I thought it was, and this is really different from this poll. Like, how can it be? But it's a pollster, so it's got to be good. Actually, no, it doesn't have to be good. There are some pollsters who just produce absolute garbage, and people suck it up because it is exactly what they want to hear. So that was the kind of the first half of this was looking into that. I suggest you go and listen to that Majority Report, that whole piece. It is really interesting. There's a 17-minute video there. Also go and check Dave Trotter's channel out, because he talks about this kind of stuff quite often, particularly as you can see here with Atlas, with SoCal. He also did a live stream, a video on he did a live stream on actually looking at GOP MAGA channels to see whether they know what they're talking about as YouTubers, but also looks at other polls as well. So really good analysis as someone that I think is got good provenance himself, and he knows what he's talking about. Really looks at like bad New York Times polls. So it even looks at the crosstabs when a decent pollster like New York Times Siena poll comes up with conclusions, certain polls where they're like, oh, this is a bit of an outlier. This doesn't show what we've shown elsewhere. And actually, New York Times Siena are quite good at being quite self-aware. So when they do polls that are a bit outlier, they go, this could be wrong. We need to look at this. As in, this is interesting. You are going to get anomalies now and again. You shouldn't just look at a single poll and go, well, that's true, or this is definitely the case in whatever state or across the country. But there was an example where you look at the kind of metadata review, or the crosstabs in that particular New York Times Siena poll some time back. It was pretty problematic. Anyway, so there you go. That pollsters, we need to be very careful when we look at what polls show, and we need to be careful with how we interpret them and what conclusions can be derived from them. Now, polls are some people claim they're kind of predictive, but actually more often than not, this is what Dave Trotter, and we're going to look at voting trends, Dave Trotter here. He talks about them being nowcasts. They're literally just a snapshot in time where if this is accurate, this is what would happen right now. But actually, they're not predictive of what's going to happen in the future because all sorts of different things can happen. And there are all sorts of variables that are involved that will change and are changing, etc., etc. So they're not so much predictive as snapshot nowcasts. What can be more useful is actual raw data, and we are into the period of early votes, right? And early votes, absentee votes, etc., etc. This is particularly the case in Pennsylvania, and there's now enough data to be able to think that we can derive at least some tentative conclusions from what's going on in Pennsylvania. And as mentioned, Pennsylvania is the absolute critical state. 19 electoral votes, electoral college votes, and you might be able to also say if Pennsylvania goes one way, then probably Wisconsin and Michigan will as well. So you get one, you get all three, maybe. But it is really crucial because that's a big load of electoral college votes in an election that is incredibly tight. So not only Dave Trotter, but also a chap called Christopher Boozy has looked at the early votes here in Pennsylvania. Let's go through Dave Trotter's first and listen to what he has to say.
All right, so if we look at the early votes in Pennsylvania, so we have 1% turnout as of right now, we can see Democrats have cast 72.9% of the ballots in the state. The Republicans have only cast 19.4% of the ballots, with the others and non-party affiliates, they have only cast 7.8% of.
So just to explain what this means, it means that in Pennsylvania, people, as far as I understand this, and correct me if I'm wrong, but people who are registered as Democrats, people who are registered as Republicans, and people who are registered as others or independents, how many of those have voted? Now, what you have to assume is that all people registered as Democrats are going to vote Democrat. All people who are registered as Republicans are going to vote Republican. All people who have voted as independents, they're going to vote one or the other. So there's lots of unknowns here. But what it is more likely telling us is not so much, because there are assumptions about how many registered Republicans are actually going to vote Democrat, and whether more registered Republicans are going to vote Democrat than registered Democrats are going to vote Republican. And I think, judging on just intuitions from my personal point of view, I think there's more Republicans who are going to vote Democrats. We have seen that. We can extrapolate that to some degree from famous Republicans who have said they're going to vote Democrat compared to famous Democrats who said they're going to vote Republican. Virtually no famous present Democrats. You can say Tulsi Gabbard and RFK Jr., but they're not present Democrats. They were, but have long since sort of left the Democratic fold. But famous Democrats stepping over the aisle, crossing the aisle to vote Republican, I can't think of any. And yet there are literally hundreds and hundreds of Republicans that are coming out day after day, either lawmakers or further down the ticket, state legislature, Republicans are saying they're going to vote Democrat. And there's a big movement. Now, since that's a one-way street at the moment, one would assume that that's probably going to be reflected in the electorate. It would be rather weird if just famous or politician or legislative Republicans are going to vote Democrat, but no normal Republicans are going to do that. That would just be too weird. So what I think we are justified in thinking that more Republicans are going to vote Democrats. So there is that. But essentially what this really tells you, prima facie, is enthusiasm. And when you look at previous trends for early votes, if more Democrats are voting early, or the percentages of early votes are skewing much more Democrats than previous elections, then we can conclude, I think, we can be justified in saying that Democrats are at the moment more enthused to vote. When we talk about enthusiasm, this can turn into votes very significantly, because undecideds isn't just undecided between Republican and Democrat. Undecideds are whether I'm going to vote or stay on the couch. And if you are seeing an enthusiasm difference between the Democrats and Republicans, then you are seeing a much better chance. If this is saying more people are enthused to vote Democrats early, then you can say more people are probably going to be enthused to get off the couch to vote Democrat than they are to get off the couch and vote Republican, given like similar sort of unenthused people. So the enthusiasm for the Democrats seems to be higher from what we are seeing from the early votes.
Of the ballots. Now, where we can really see this trend happening is at the county level. Now, if we look at Montgomery County, one of the key ones that everyone talks about when it comes to the Democrats winning the state of Pennsylvania, you can see 49% of registered voters in Montgomery County are Democrats. But as of right now, their composition of the early vote is 68%, a 19% increase. That is huge. The Republicans and the Independents are down. So now if we go to Dauphin County, which is where Harrisburg is located, you can see that 44% of the registered voters are Democrats, but right now they make up 64% of the electorate compared to the 28% for Republicans and the 8% for Independents.
So at a county level, looking at the actual data, this isn't like predictive. This is the data we have right now. But can we derive any predictions from this? Well, at the moment, it seems that Democrats are more enthused to get out and vote than Republicans. This isn't a case of, well, Democrats early vote more often than Republicans. Well, as he talks about a lot elsewhere, that's not necessarily true. And it wasn't the case before, in elections before the pandemic. What we saw is that Democrats voted a lot more by mail and early then, but actually in previous elections, it's been a bit of a mixed bag. And Republicans used to vote early more prevalently than Democrats, and certainly in certain places. So you can't necessarily say that. But what you can say here is that compared to previous, no, not yet, but you can say on this data that he's showing you is that the Democrats are more enthused to early vote at the moment than both Republicans and Independents. Independents is an interesting one because actually, if you had Independents being enthused as well, then you could possibly draw a conclusion that if it was only Independents and Democrats, not Republicans, so that were above the average. So if the Independents were up and Republicans were way down, then you could conclude that Independents would have been enthused in the same way that Democrats have. So maybe the Independents are swinging Democrat. I don't think you can make that conclusion here.
Now, if you go over to Chester County, another key county for the Democrats, you can see Democrats just slightly have a voter registration advantage at 41%, but as of this moment, they comprise of 59% of the voter turnout in that county.
That's an interesting stat as well. So in this county, Republicans and Democrats broadly make up the same proportion of the electorate, and Democrats are they are over double the voting proportion of these early votes in Chester County, and actually Independents are closer there as well. So again, I think you can derive some positive conclusions here for the Democrats over the Republicans.
Republicans are down significantly at 27%, considering they're 40% of the electorate. And over in Pittsburgh and Allegheny County, we can see the same thing. Democrats are a little bit higher at 56% of registered voters, but right now they comprise of 74% of the electorate, with the Republicans, who are usually 28% of the electorate, they are turning out right now at 19%, so a significant drop for the Republicans. Now, the reason I picked these specific counties and maybe not Bucks County and others is because we just have a little bit more votes out of these counties compared to Bucks. Hopefully over the next few days, we're going to have it a little bit more uniformed when it comes to actual votes throughout the state of Pennsylvania and get a better handle on what's going to happen. But the question is how much does this have an impact? Well, let's go ahead and first look at some of the other states, see how many early votes they have in right now, see what the turnout rates are as well, and see where this election might be going. So if we look at...
So he then goes and looks at other states as well and finds some similar data, but also makes some predictions based on, or I guess nowcasts, based on the data in those states. So go and check out the full video. It's really, really interesting. Christopher Boozy here says, now that we have early vote data, we can better understand what's happening on the ground in Pennsylvania. In my opinion, early vote data is more reliable than polls. I successfully used early vote data in 2022 and 2020. However, you must be careful because early vote data can sometimes be misleading. And here he has an image of Democrats and Republicans and others in Pennsylvania there. Right, it's still early and conditions on the ground may shift, but the current developments in Pennsylvania are eye-opening. As of today, 61.6% of absentee and mail-in ballot requests have come from Democrats, a significant figure that could indicate trends leading up to Election Day. So if more people right now are requesting mail-in ballots and absentee ballots than are represented just generally in the electorate, then it suggests, as mentioned, that there is an enthusiasm advantage for in this case, the Democrats. 61.6% of the absentee and mail-in ballots are Democrats and 27% Republicans. And that is much greater than the proportion that they normally have in the electorate. So Democrats aren't just leading in requested ballots, he says, they're also leading in returned ballots by a whopping 72.8%. Not only are they requesting them, but they're then returning them even more. So it could be that you every election cycle you request yours because it's just part of what you do, or your relatives do it for you, but actually you haven't been that bothered to return it. Like, I've requested it, but it doesn't mean I'm that enthusiastic about filling it out and doing it. So the return is even more a suggestion of enthusiasm, because like I've asked for it and I've filled it out and I've sent it back already because I'm that enthused about getting my vote in. And that skews even more to the Democrats here. So a whopping 72.8% of returned ballots are Democrat. This may indicate higher enthusiasm among Democratic voters compared to Republicans. However, it's also possible that ballots from key counties are still in transit. So obviously caveats, etc., etc. But the situation for Republicans is even more dire, he says. According to TargetSmart's race modeling data, black voters represented just 8.8% of the Pennsylvania electorate in 2020. However, that percentage has surged dramatically, with black voters now making up 19.5% of the vote. And it is always the case that across all the states that black voters skew towards Democrats. And the argument is, how much? Is it going to be 90% Democrat, 10% Republican, or is it going to be something different to that? But the more black voters you have in Pennsylvania, the one would hypothesize the more advantageous that is for the Democrats. It's important to understand, he says, that while I'm analysing partisan voting patterns, the electorate doesn't always vote along party lines. And this is the important thing. This just tells you the registered voters, whether they have voted or not. It doesn't tell you who they voted for. So as I said earlier, the question is how many Democrats are going to vote for Republicans and how many Republicans are going to vote for the Democrats, for the other side of the coin. Not all Republicans, he says, will vote for Trump, and not all Democrats will vote for VP Harris. However, I estimate, and I don't know what he's done to come to this conclusion, but he says, I estimate that Trump will lose 8 to 10% of Republican support in Pennsylvania. Now, as mentioned, you can look at some of those famous Republicans moving to the Democrats and say, well, it's probably going to be the case that more Republicans are going to vote Harris than Democrats are going to vote Trump. And I would think that's broadly correct. But anyway, I thought I'd show you these numbers and talk you through some of these ideas to just get a sense of what might be happening already, which is we might be getting some evidence to suggest that actually Pennsylvania is looking quite good for the Democrats. And the question is then, does this coincide with what we are seeing with the polling averages? So the latest polling averages for Pennsylvania have the Democrats up 1%, but it is insanely close and well within the margin of error. In fact, just 0.6 there really. So not even 1%, that's rounded up. And then we have, when you look at these polls, let's go back to the beginning of the video. So the last three polls here going into the polling average On message, paid for by the Republicans, gives an even. Patriot polling, 2 teenagers from a high school, gives Trump +1. Trafalgar Group, paid for by the Republicans and very much skews to the right, as it says here. Trafalgar Group is a partisan pollster for the Republican Party. Trump +2. We've got Atlas Intel, Trump +3, Trump +3, which Dave from Voting Trends looks at and completely picks apart. So Atlas Intel poll review, he takes it to pieces. So it's easy to get downbeat about how the poll is looking in Pennsylvania for the Democrats. I'm not trying to be pro-Democrat here and blah, 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 but actually this is the data. We've got the early voting data, and then we can look at our understanding, we can question our previous understanding of pollsters and say that actually all of these polls here, Emerson College notwithstanding, appear to be fairly dodgy, and they're the ones that have Trump up in Pennsylvania. Morning Consult, I think Morning Consult is actually a C+ pollster. It does skew a little bit to the Democrats, and +5, +6, +3, +6, depending on how you slice and dice their data in that particular poll for Harris. You've got BSG-GS Strategy Group has Harris up +1, +2, Activote +3. They're one we don't know too much about, Activote. Fox News, as mentioned before, depending on how you slice and dice theirs, generally has Harris up, so on and so forth. So, what you really want to do is have a polling aggregator like 538 that actually just gets rid of all the crap pollsters. Just says, you are not good enough, you ain't in the polling average. And only have the top. It'd be really interesting to see what the polling average would be if you just took not down to poll 229 here, right? But actually just the top 20 pollsters, the top 30 pollsters, and say, right, now what's the polling average? And what does it look like in Pennsylvania? But yeah, we don't appear to have that. Anyway, I just thought I would splurge my opinion to you by stream of consciousness talking about this stuff. Hopefully it's of interest. Let me know what you think. Take care. Speak soon.